Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Darley and Inglis. My name's Brent O'Brien, and joining me, as always, is Tim Rowe. This week, Racing New South Wales finally moves to take control of the Australian Turf Club. Peter V'landys remains undecided on his future in racing, and a nationwide Telstra outage causes a bit of chaos. In breeding and bloodstock, James Harron joins forces with Yulong. Australian breeders continue to look towards North America. And what does a cooling stallion market tell us about the state of the industry? In wagering, Britain's gambling reforms could have implications in Australia. A bookmaker makes a surprise switch to Tasmania, and regulators continue to tighten the screws on gambling operators and influencers. Tim, let's start out with what is the one of the biggest stories of the last 6 months, and probably from a legal perspective, this one is coming to an end now. Racing New South Wales has formally placed the Australian Turf Club into administration and appointed Morgan Kelly to oversee a review of operations, finances, and governance. Yeah, we've spoken a lot about this story, so don't really have to go over old ground here, Tim. But obviously, this sort of stems from the legal action, which has got to gone back and forth over the course of the past sort of 6 or 7 months. Racing New South Wales winning the right to put the ATC into administration. No surprise, probably this happened, Tim. That we didn't really expect this to go to the High Court, and it looks like it's a bit of a new reality for the ATC and its relationship with the regulator.
Yeah, and what's probably caught my eye with the announcement this week is the appointment of or forming of an advisory committee led by ATC Chair Tim Hale and with a couple of Racing New South Wales board members on there, Michael Crismail and Simon Tuxon as well. Now, how that works, what say that advisory committee will have in the conduct of the ATC will be interesting. Among the interpretations of the appeal judgment that went Racing New South Wales way is that, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's been put to me that the well, naturally the Morgan Kelly has to act in the best interests of the ATC, which could be in conflict with Racing New South Wales. Therefore, the Racing New South Wales board members on that advisory committee, can they report back confidential information to Racing New South Wales? All those little things that we haven't been told yet. It's going to be, and who has the final say? Is it Morgan Kelly? Can the advisory committee overrule certain things? It's still a little, quite a few unanswered questions, despite the court's emphatic judgment, I guess.
Yeah, I think like from more reports, I mean, for the way that it works in terms of what Morgan Kelly's role will be, he'll be the ultimate arbiter of what's going on. The other question is, you mentioned that committee before. There's three of the current board members or previous board members, given the board doesn't really operate in the same way. Tim Hale, Caroline CSC, and Bernie Brooks involved there, along with the two Racing New South Wales board members. What happens to the remaining board members, Annette English and David McGrath, is look, we're hearing conflicting stories about that they will still be involved. There will still be some involvement and discussion there. It's not really a clear-cut thing. Racing New South Wales have announced that they will continue to guarantee the loan. That is obviously a key part of the sort of ability for ATC to keep going in its current the way that it's doing, and provide some investment, including the long-awaited fixing of the Randwick escalators, which has become a bit of a I guess a bit of a one that they pull out all the time as an example of some of the issues going on at the ATC. So, look, this has been this extends far further back than just the past 7 months. This goes right back to the Rosehill announcement, 2.5 years ago, and where things sit with that. What will be interesting to see what improvements the ATC can make, what things it can do, what things it can't do. We'll get into the change of power dynamics at Racing New South Wales in a minute, but that does have effects on this in terms of the way things are working. There's a lot still to play out here. I guess it'll be a watch and see to see what happens. I think from an executive level, we know from an executive level that Steve McMahon will stay as CEO and continue to work, and as with the rest of the executive team, so none of that will change. But will there be other significant changes? Obviously, there's been a review into the hospitality aspect of the business from Morgan Kelly already, which has been undergoing and working through ways to optimize that. And there's been some challenges there around possible theft and other issues within that as well. What's going to come out of that? I think what ATC members and probably the broader racing public would love to see out of this, Tim, was some certainty around what the future of the ATC looks like. Because we probably thought, we were told until probably 15 months ago that the sale of Rosehill was going to, cure all and fix things up. But I think what we're learning here, Tim, and what we have learned from this is that this is not just an ATC issue. It's the way that it's structured. And some of the issues at the ATC have been caused by the fact that funding has, as a rule, flooded more to the PRA, so Racing New South Wales, because of the nature of the way that funding's changed, and the decline in the TAB return and all that sort of stuff has put ATC under pressure. Now, the problems the ATC is confronting are not like, to the ATC alone. Like, there's similar problems that, the VRC, the Melbourne Racing Club, Moonee Valley Racing Club, Brisbane Racing Club, all these other ones are actually facing. Some of the stuff in New Zealand has hallmarks that's going on in Australia. It seems like we're all trying to solve the same problem, but we're probably trying to find different ways to do it, Tim.
Yes, and, I guess some people sort of watching what's unfolded here will be frustrated at, okay, Racing New South Wales funding or whether it's a loan or how,
Yeah.
providing money to fix the escalators, for instance. Why didn't they do that 3 years ago or 5 years ago? They're controlling the purse strings and, the argument is, and maybe fairly, Racing New South Wales, "Well, we'll give you the money, but we want some power or we want something in exchange." And others are arguing, perhaps through the review of the Thoroughbred Racing Act, that Racing Stars has too much power or too much money. They should be distributing those funds to the clubs to fix, to improve facilities and training infrastructure, all these different things which appear to be going to happen now that the clubs in administration.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one as well. Yeah, that the whole thing that playing on top of this is obviously then the hazard review, which will sit on top of how racing works in New South Wales and how things work out. But again, the things that review is considering challenges across the board for racing, not just in New South Wales. But we've got this overlay on top of this, Tim, of the sort of uncertainty around the future of Racing New South Wales CEO Peter V'landys, who spoke during the week after being sort of front and centre of as the executive chairman of the Australian Rugby League Commission, of a $5.6 billion rights announcement, which was obviously high profile in the broader media. But V'landys was asked specifically about his thoughts about whether he would consider the executive chairman role if that could happen within the rugby league context on an ongoing basis, which would mean that the 4-month leave of absence that he's taking from Racing New South Wales job, which starts next week and goes to sort of mid-November, would that, what was he considering if that could happen? And his basic response was, "Well, I'll see what happens, and I've probably got a couple of months to make my decision." Now, what was interesting about that, from my perspective, Tim, the thoughts when this was first announced 7 or 8 weeks ago was that there's a few things had to happen in NRL clubland and et cetera to make this happen. It now sounds like it's Peter's decision, not the decision of what's going on. And where does that leave Racing New South Wales in a situation where obviously Graham Hinton's taken control for this period as interim CEO, and Graham's got plenty of experience in that space. But where does that put racing? It's sort of waiting for Peter to come back to them. So it's a really interesting situation to have, a CEO of a racing club or one sporting body using, I guess, working with another sporting body. I would say it's unprecedented.
Yeah, again, some will argue it's against good governance or a conflict of interest. I'm not saying one way or the other, but some will suggest that. And I'd say just his answers, that's Peter V'landys down to a T. He's carried a lot of favour or been able to garner a lot of power over the last 20 years at Racing South within government, now rugby league over the last sort of 6 or 7 years as chairman of Australian Rugby League Commission. Basically, it sounds like it is his call, and he loves it. That he thrives on this environment of people wanting him. That they have to come to him, and he will make the decision. It's not, oh well, please let me have the job. It's his decision, and yeah, again, that's his personality, the way he's conducted his sporting or his sporting administration career. That's him to a T, and I'm sure he will make a decision. If you believe all the speculation, he won't be coming back to racing, but time will tell. I guess he'll again weigh it up, and he's got bills to pay and things like that, and what he can get paid in racing compared to rugby league full time, and having to give up one or the other. Will certainly give up racing, and so yeah, again, I think that speculation will continue for at least the next couple of months, and then the Racing New South Wales board, if he does go to rugby league, have a big decision to make, whether they promote from within or go external with the new leader of Racing New South Wales.
I'm not too sure what Peter V'landys' middle name is, but if it is unprecedented, it wouldn't surprise me because Peter tends to do things in a different way. And, what was also interesting is his commentary during that press conference. He does love a little aside about Gil McLachlan and his comment that Gil McLachlan said to him, "Oh, Peter, it's time to turn to the next chapter." And he sort of, jokingly suggested that Gil was trying to, was, you know, sick of dealing with him around the tab stuff, and that flows into what's going on in the national tote. So interesting to see. I mean, he's been a massive figure in racing. I would argue, from an administration point of view, I'm not sure. Certainly not in my time, Tim. Probably the last 45 years or so, that there's been a bigger figure in Australian racing than Peter V'landys. If he was to leave racing, it would be a significant move, and I think I kind of don't know what the ramifications may be, but if we were betting men at the moment, Tim, and you and I don't mind a punt, you'd probably be betting that he ends up with rugby league, then he'll stay with NRL, but also then he'll go to NRL or the Rugby League Commission or whatever it looks like going forward. Another story that generated plenty of interest this week for those of us on the largest carrier in the country, Tim, Telstra. I walked out my front door yesterday, oblivious to the world around me, and then suddenly realised my phone didn't work. And it sort of occurred to me, in a world where connectivity in racing is massive, losing Telstra for even if it was like a 4 or 5 hour period, significant on Wednesday morning too, Tim, where when acceptances are taken from a Racing Australia perspective
Oh,
for the
I had
weekend.
a couple I missed call, I tried to ring it back 2 minutes later, it wouldn't go through. I was like, "Oh, what?" They turned it off, but no, then I saw the news, that was early on Wednesday morning. Yeah, just I guess, we're all connected now with the internet and mobile networks and things like that, yeah, if it goes down, and we've seen it, you know, tragically with the Optus, outage, I think it was it last year or the year before, the what can transpire just because of technology going down like that, which is, in the scheme of things, it wasn't that bigger issue yesterday. The fields came out eventually. The Magic Millions delayed their online or digital sale till closing on Thursday, just probably just to ensure all the buyers don't miss out. You know, again, not the end of the world, but does show that how reliant we are on technology.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley. The Darley roster is one of the real talking points this season, and the numbers show why. New for 2026 are Tentaris and Observer, two exciting additions to a 16-strong roster. Across the group, you're looking at 43 Group 1 wins, 81 Group wins, 87 Stakes wins, 12 Champions titles, and 8 race or track records broken. And when you're a breeder, that's exactly what you want to see. Horses with the race records, the quality, and the substance to give you confidence. Go to darley.com.au for more details. Moving into the breeding space now, Tim, and a story came out late last week, which, I don't know, did it surprise us? Maybe the name connecting together. James Harron linking up with Yulong, going to be working in sort of a bloodstock advisory role. Initially, it was sort of suggested that he might be going down on a full-time basis, but, James is a pretty busy bloodstock agent, one of the more prominent bloodstock agents in Australia. I guess, you know, in this situation where Yulong are moving into that New South Wales Hunter Valley landscape, they're looking to I guess skill up a little bit and bring in a bit more profile and someone who can sort of do those deals. And James will be doing some work for Yulong and sort of linking up, which is it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. You spoke to James last week about this, Tim. What was the sort of his thoughts around sort of how this is going to operate?
He was at pains to just suggest that it's the Yulong, while significant, is it just not just another client, but it is another client rather than he's working full time for Yulong. So they'll be calling on his expertise, I guess, with matings, perhaps, where assessing their stock. As we know, New South Wales or the Hunter Valley, so commercially focused more than any other state or breeding region where, if you just on and off stallions unfairly most of the time, arguably, but they I think providing that some advice with, you know, to some of his clients to breeding to Yulong stallions, but also what Yulong should be doing with some of their mares and stallions up there. And then I also spoke to Junjang, and he didn't rule out that perhaps Yulong invests in the James Harron Colt syndicate down the track. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and again, no bloodstock agent or business is going to knock back clients, are they? As a rule, especially one the profile of Yulong and the depth and the number of horses they've got.
Yeah, I guess the challenge for Yulong is trying to make sure they're in that Hunter Valley mindset. Like they've been in Victoria for a while, they've moved into the Hunter Valley. It's a very connected world up there. James is obviously very well connected. He's obviously worked extensively with Coolmore. He's got connections at Newgate. He's got connections everywhere. Like he's got his horses that he's sold have gone different studs across that space. So to be in there and sort of having those conversations is key. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works out and sort of what comes out of it and whether, you know, James's influence extends beyond just, I suppose, the stud stuff, whether it comes to, selections and other bits that are going on. We'll keep an eye on that. That's one thing for sure. We always, when we get to the first yearling sale of the year, we're often looking around to see who's talking to who and who's working with who, Tim, and that'll be something we'll be doing next January when we get to Magic Millions. It seems a long way away, certainly from the cold of the Australian winter at the moment. But anyway, Tim, talking about winter and summer, you sort of look forward last week to have a look at, yeah, you spoke to Glenn Hale a couple of weeks ago about Gun Runner, and we're talking about sort of, I guess, the way that Australians are looking to use North American stallions and whether that's, something that's going to become more commonplace. We're probably seeing less shuttlers than we did previously. I have to look at the data, but it feels like there's fewer horses shuttling out than probably were, especially at sort of that medium sort of level. But do you feel like it's going to be something that happens more, that we're going to be people looking left of field in order to source horses that are bred sort of along American lines?
Yes, well, it was interesting social media reaction to that story, and US horses haven't worked down here. I certainly wasn't suggesting they shuttle down here. It was the Tats July sales on at the moment, for instance, in the UK. So and there has been Australian involvement or Australasian involvement already in that sale. What I was suggesting is if you do buy a mare up in the Northern Hemisphere, you've missed the, you know, you and intend on bringing it down to Australia to breed with and not get a joint, you're missing a year or effectively. So the option there is, okay, if you buy one in the UK or privately in the States, send it to Southern Hemisphere time to a gun runner, to not this time, or both available. And generally significantly discounted service fees compared to what they stand for in the northern hemisphere, and bring them down that way to hopefully generate cash flow and hopefully breed a good horse a year earlier than you would have. And I think, as in Glenn Hale's case, as they heard on the podcast last week, he went looking in the northern hemisphere because he couldn't compete with the Yulongs and Coolmores or the other commercial buyers for the type of mare he was after. So I think that trend will continue, and you wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. Not suggesting that, in the buying international mares and certainly matings, to Northern Hemisphere stallions. But I think there's options there, Gun Runner, and as I said, not this time in the UK, with Frankel and Kingman and other sort of young stallions coming through. Not a Thunder, perhaps, who's obviously exposed down here. The interesting one, Siuni won't be covering to Southern Hemisphere time again this year. Hasn't for the last couple of years. He's getting a bit older and they're managing him. So, yeah, but that's, again, it's a small selection each year, but I think it's something that breeders are looking at and will continue to look at.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the diversity of, I guess, broodmare size that we have in Australia, which are an indication of those American influences and stuff coming through, it's becoming more and more commonplace, and we've seen it with some of the American mares. You mentioned last week about them working quite well with Schnitzel, and a few of those other sort of examples of horses that have come out of those American mares. So I can't see why not, particularly given the Australian market, as you mentioned before, for those elite broodmares in Australia is quite strong, and we tend to have, and it's a good sort of pivot into the article I wrote this week about sort of stallion price in Australia. We tend to have a little bit of a divided market in Australia at the moment, where there's either top stallions or sort of middle of the road stallions. But that trying to fill that gap is something that they're trying to do at the moment. That's not easy to do. If you can't afford to send your horses, to that top end, Two Day and a Hot, Extreme Choice, even Vinny, who's a bit cheaper these days, or Zoo Star, or these horses. Where are you sending your horses to? You're sort of going unproven stallions. We've obviously got Super Set this year, which is an interesting one. We've got Home Affairs that's had a bit of a boost. But as a rule, and I think from memory, I wrote this week, Tim, that there was, 12 fewer stallions in that 25,000 plus range than there were last year. It's kind of an interesting market at the moment, the Australian stallion market, isn't it, Tim?
Oh, absolutely. If you're a commercial breeder, it's very challenging. One of the biggest risks you can overcapitalizing or overpaying on service fees for your mare. Just if you're trying to make money, it's a very challenging environment to get that right. You got to forecast 2 and 3 years ahead. It's not easy, and then getting access, getting early covers, getting info, all the other risks that everyone knows about. So yeah, it's sort of that's coming back to thinking outside the square at times isn't the worst play, but it is, a challenging market with a lot of high profile, well credentialed young stallions who are unproven or, Home Affairs looks like he started very well and got his service fees being pushed up as a result. Then you've got those stallions that might have, with 3-year-olds, Wooden Bassett's up there, bivouac for the second season size title. Obviously, Wooden Bassett's no longer with us. Again, it's just a challenging market, and the proven stallions are, they're not getting any younger as well. There's the sort of, as we've alluded to a lot, there's a gap there, in the sort of 10 to 15-year-old stallions probably.
Yeah, yeah, it is an interesting one too. As you sit there and think about like Home Affairs, for example, and to a certain extent, Super Seth. Like, obviously, Coolmore losing Wooden Bassett, and so you think last year was a significant step back, and they need to find stallions for that space. Yeah, if that hadn't have happened, like Home Affairs is going to probably get a quality of horse this year that he probably wouldn't have got if Wheaton Bassett was still around, and probably say Drink was around. And it's arguable that Super Set deal doesn't happen if that doesn't happen. So it does create a gap, I suppose. I think there is a gap in the market that people are trying to work with. The stat that I was pulling out before, sorry, just there are 5 fewer stallions with a fee above 25,000 this year, just to clarify that stat, down from 60 in 2025. And what was also interesting is that the average fee for new stallions at the moment is 31,167. That is higher, the highest average for freshman stallions in Australia since 2023, and an increase on the figure from last year. Obviously, you're dealing with a small range of stallions, but it is interesting that those first season stallions are sort of bullishly priced. Tentara's probably pushing that out a little bit because he's got 88,000. But we've seen that in recent years. I think Home Affairs started out at 110, Animo started out at 110. Like the price for those freshman stallions is certainly, there's a lot of anticipation from them. What I probably did notice this year was that there were some stallions which were reasonably priced quite early on. Like I thought Vinrock was quite well priced, Tim, for his profile. And there's probably a story to come out next couple of days is that there's a Group 1 winning 2-year-old colt coming through at the moment as a stallion prospect, and they're struggling to get the deal done on the terms that they want because the market's just much more, from a stallion perspective, they're much more risk averse in terms of taking on these horses, aren't they?
Yes. Well, that deal, who knows? That horse could be back on the track, before we know it. Um, yeah, and again, I think, studs are probably yeah, with the exception of the very high profile, Guest House, Golden Slipper winners, the other very good horses, Reserve Banks and those other sort of horses that have gone to market this year or been sold, it's the studs that have got the upper hand rather than the other way around, as opposed to, say, probably, in the last 5 years or certainly early 2020s post-COVID when there was a boom. And that was, the owners of those colts had the upper hand.
Yeah, and that's why I changed. Just on a completely like a different angle on this sort of the stallion space, Star Spangled Banner. What an extraordinary year! I think he's now got 3 individual Group 1 winners in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're only up to July. Only Night of Thunder's got more, and I think Frankel's got 3. I mean, he's having an extraordinary like renaissance since, I guess, we know that he's confined to his duties in the Northern Hemisphere now, but his ongoing influence is amazing.
Well, I think, there's a bit to that. Obviously, Puma lost Galileo and, the Justifiers in America. So I guess they had a lot of very nice mares to support A Stallion and a proven stallion, and Star Spangled Banner's sort of been the beneficiary of that over the last few years, and it's been brought out through, these, 3-year-old Group 1 winners, this season so far. So they're, it's just his longevity, he's not tailing off, as we know. Again, Tom Magner and was on the podcast a while ago, sort of in May, about talking about him and Anthony Mithen from Rosemont as well. So again, most stallions have probably either haven't made it by now or their fertility's tailed off. He's got better, which is just remarkable.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying, Tim, there's not any other, like, there's no Australian reverse shuttlers at the moment, is there? So, like, he comes from a previous era, like off the back of Exceed and Excel and Fastnet Rock and a few of those horses that sort of, they push that. It's just not happening anymore. And, like, obviously he's not coming back to Australia now, so it's a bit different. But, he's sort of on the tail end of that. But, I mean, it may give Coolmore some confidence that that Australian blood is, so valuable, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, just, well, Royal Ascot's been and gone, and we didn't get the win there, and there was no Colts anyway. But you probably, for reverse shuttling now, I think the horse probably needs to be exposed to the Australian market, or sorry, to the European market, big performance at Royal Ascot or one of those races to put them on the radar. Zoo Star did a good job over there, obviously became too valuable here, but again, he was sort of left field. He went well without, knocking out of the park commercially. I think that's no offense to Widden or David Redvers and Tween Hills. I think that's a fair assessment. And again, he's too valuable down here anyway to take up there. So back up there. So it's and even Darley and Coolmore will admit that the shuttlers are, they have to put a little bit more work into them to put them on the radar of Australian breeders, Delacroix and things like that. This season will be interesting to watch. They look highly talented. Their talent's unquestionable, but still local and colonial probably is more easy to sell.
The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. Entries are open for the 2026 Inglis Ready to Race sale, Australasia's leading breeze up sale, and the auction that produced Group 1 winning colts Trombolt and Libertad this season. The sale continues to set the benchmark, recording a gross of more than 20 million in 2025 with an 81% clearance rate. Buyers from across Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and beyond continue to target the sale for its proven results and outstanding graduates. The 2026 Inglis Ready to Race sale will be held at Riverside on October 15th, with August entries closing on August 7th. Visit inglis.com.au for more information. Finally, in wagering, Tim, Warwick Barr had a look at the UK gambling reforms this week, and we've obviously seen. Well, they're not calling them affordability checks; they're calling them, I think, financial risk assessments or something like that. The details of which sort of are in the article itself. I think it's £1,000 turnover in a day, or £3,000 turnover over 90 days, which is an interesting point of view. I don't know. Turnover builds up pretty quickly. That there will be some risk assessments conducted through credit checks and various things or whatever else. I think what is interesting about these checks are, I think it's inevitable that this ends up somehow on the Australian agenda. They will be discussed. They certainly will be put forward by reform advocates. Affordability checks were mentioned in the UNW Lose More report, but not actually included among the 31 recommendations because they'd be too much an impulse for day-to-day punters. But you can see a point where the next couple of years, Tim, this is going to get on the agenda in Australia. We're going to be talking about, whether we have to prove, we can afford the fact that we're going to have a bit of money here or a bit of money there on a horse, which I don't think's a very positive thing for the industry, and I certainly think will have a negative impact both the racing and wagering industries.
So I think maybe the Gambling Commission think it's well intentioned. I'm sure the government does think that, but the unintended consequences that people are going to get hurt by it are the middle, the professionals or the higher staking punters, I guess, or that are, measured and have a bank and, use it, bet sensibly, I guess, will be impacted. And then I also, and then also the problem gamblers, the ones they're trying to attract, will still bet anyway. They'll find a way to bet, whether it's the old SP starts coming back, or things like that. I would suggest, and then the ones that are doing for a bit of entertainment go, well, that's just too hard. I'm not going to bet, and that's where the big issue is. As I said, the professionals will find a way, whether it's the illegal exchanges, city bets, and I sort of just thinking about it this morning, Brent. I think from what I've seen on social media and from the stories I've read, Betfair I think will take the biggest hit there because the traders, especially over there, back and trade, back something at even
Yeah.
money and lay it off at $1.90 and back. Is that turnover counted? Like, that's just mind-boggling. They probably haven't considered those sort of elements to it. And then, even now in Australia, Betfair still provides liquidity and controls the market in a way, or helps set prices, rightly or wrongly. That's that's a fact. So I think it will impact the market just in terms of how it operates. Maybe it'll be more volatile now with prices. I'm not sure, but I think it's a step too far at the moment. I hope it doesn't come in here because it's intrusive enough having to hand over bank statements and things from certain bookmakers if you want to get paid sometimes to to pretty much all and sundry. It'd be diabolical for the racing industry, and I know they've campaigned already over there in the UK, but I don't know how they get this overturned or try and find a happy medium, whether it's too little, too late, perhaps.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it plays out, and I think the context that they're probably trying to regulate on what the system looks like now, not what might look like next 5 years. I still think, and maybe I'm living in a pipe dream, but I still think prediction markets will change a lot of things across the world. The effect it's having in America is quite significant. Now, obviously, it all depends on legislation and how things work, but we know with these disruptive forces that they come across and they change things anyway. We're going to have people making markets, like the power of AI to create, create the opportunity for people to make their own markets and design it. I think wagering looks a lot different in 10 years' time than it does now. If they want to regulate, they should be regulating for that. Close to home, one of the ones that's probably close to my home in particular, Tim, Better moving to Tasmania, which is a significant move from they've sort of become the first bookmaker to leave the Northern Territory. The mainstream sort of coverage of this has been, oh, well, it's been driven by, the increase of betting taxes in the Northern Territory and whatever else. But the misgivings about the Northern Territory regime or the way that it's run up there has been, going on for a while. They're not just centered around the fact about the cost of doing business. It's about the way that's being regulated up there. The question is whether in 12 months' time or 18 months' time, if Betr still are out on their own or other bookmakers are looking at moving out of Northern Territory. I can tell you from my conversations, on background with a few bookmakers that everyone's been kicking the tires on other opportunities. Everyone has been looking at the fact that maybe Northern Territory is not the place to be, and you're kind of feeling that maybe that time, that sort of haven that Darwin's become over the past 20 years might be coming to an end. It's a significant one. It's become a significant story, political story in Tasmania. Not hard to become a significant political story in Tasmania. We love a drama down here, but you know, I guess we could say that betting up on bookies has become a national pastime, and the politicians have certainly got into it. We only got to see the way that things are being discussed at a federal government level around this gambling advertising reforms, Tim, to see what happened. And Better copped a reasonable whack from various parliamentarians, independents, Greens, etc., calling them predatory and all these things. I think the way this was announced or the way that it came out, like from Better's perspective, they put out their statement and whatever else, but I don't think the government have sort of covered themselves in glory on this one. It looks like whether a deal's been done or not, it looks like a deal's been done, and that's the perception that's being seen. I would have thought Eric Betts, with the experience that he has, the state treasurer, and obviously he's someone who's got a national profile through his previous work in the federal parliament, might have been a little bit more savvy around this stuff. But anyway, I guess they're just going to have to weather the storm for now. But what's become now is like, is it desirable to have this within the Tasmanian industry? Now, I'm not too sure Tasmania's in an economic state to be turning people away based upon the fact that it doesn't think, certain types of businesses like wagering businesses are, you know, brand Tasmania or not. Got a population of 550,000 people down here. It might only be 8 jobs for now, but it could be further jobs down the line. So my thoughts are that I'm not saying that you open the door and see what happens, but if you've got a business willing to invest in your state-based industry, that's just my thoughts as a lone Tasmanian against that stuff. But it's an interesting one because it probably changes the dynamic of the corporate bookmaker relationship in Australia, Tim.
Big question for you, Bren. Do you think the Tassie government in their negotiations or with Better have come up, will Tas Racing and the industry get something out of this, do you think?
Well, it's an interesting one because it comes in the context that the funding deed that ends in 2029. So we've got 3 years until that happens, just under 3 years till that happens. And what that looks like, there's no guarantee for what that looks like. The government has said they'll continue something. What does that look like? Obviously, greyhound racing is probably likely not to be existing in Tasmania by then. So there's some questions around what that looks like and how that plays out. Ladbrokes have the sponsorship in terms of sponsorship of Tas Racing until 2029. Will Better look to get more involved in the local community? Probably thinking not necessarily, but you don't know. They did sponsor, the supercars race in Darwin, for example. It's an example that they may get involved with that. So it'd be interesting to see how that sort of works out. I'm sure those in the Tasmanian racing industry will be very fascinated to see this new legislation and whether it provides a direct sort of carve out for them, an opportunity for them to access some of the money that might come through. And I think Better will be well advised to make sure that they give something back to the Tasmanian public. I'm sure that they've already got that on their agenda to make sure that their presence here is seen as a net positive, not a net negative for the community. So we'll see how that plays out, Tim. It's a really interesting story. I know it's a bit of a Tasmanian story, but also I think it speaks broader to some of the challenges faced by the corporate bookmaking sector, which is sort of, under fire a little bit from regulators, whether you believe that's right or not. But we've got ACMA sending out releases every second day. We've got Austrac throwing around enforcement actions like they're packs of cards. There's all sorts of things going on at the moment. So it's a pretty intense regulatory environment. That brings us to the end of Straight Talk, brought to you by Darley & Inglis, of course. Tim, before we go, is there anything else you want to throw onto the agenda?
Well, yes, the few things. The the Group 1 winner we were just referring to before, I think that's a deal. It's on a seesaw, but I think it's going to get done, from sort of a text message I just received. So hopefully, yes,
Keep an
that
eye on
will
the
get
straight.
done
You'll
for
know
that
about
hockey
what the
group.
horse is. We're just waiting until we find out the final details, aren't we?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. We're talking about punting and stables. I thought Arthur winning at Canterbury on Wednesday for Lucy Longmire and Tim Martin, his colours, fantastic, sort of 30-1. And didn't get something on. I looked up at the 300 and 3 in front, so the straight has cost me a fortune there. I did intend to back it, but got distracted. Um, anyway, that was good to see, and on
heaven
the sort
forbid
of
you do your day job, Tim.
yeah, and on the look, sort of on the Lucy Longmire there, or the sister Emma or twin sister Emma's with Pat Murphy, trainer or ex-jockey, trainers in a bad way in Canberra Hospital. Thinking of you, Pat. Pat did, when he was a jockey, did train, ride a couple of winners for me. Lovely bloke, and hopefully it doesn't sound good, and hopefully he can sort of beat the odds, and probably a long recovery ahead, and he can get his way out of there. But yeah, thinking of you, Pat. He's a popular sort of New South Wales guy, industry figure, and yeah, all the best to you, Pat.
Yeah, it's an industry that's needs to be good at taking care of its own people, doesn't it, Tim? Thanks for your time. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast where you're listening to. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you have a feedback or a topic you'd like to discuss, send us an email, editor@thestraight.com.au. That's editor@thestraight.com.au. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you again next week.